So the first step is to open the call. And one recommendation that we make is that at the very beginning of the call, you go through a step to confirm that the prospect is available to talk. Now, this is somewhat debated with a lot of salespeople disagreeing with confirming availability at the beginning of a cold call because they say it invites an objection. It gives the prospect an opportunity to say that they're not available. And many salespeople recommend that you just power through. Don't ask if they're available. Just keep going until they tell you that they're not. Now, I actually prefer to confirm that the prospect's available because, first of all, it's the polite thing to do. If you're going to go talk to a colleague at the company that you work for, instead of just barging in their office and talking about something, you might ask if they're available. The other thing that this does is that it helps you to identify how busy the prospect is. Because remember, we're operating with the assumption that the prospect is busy, but we want to know how busy they are. Are they normal busy in terms of the normal day-to-day operations and business, or are they crazy busy? Crazy busy would be they're sitting in the middle of a meeting, they're on the line, they're dealing with a deadline of a report that's due at the end of the day, they're fighting some sort of fire. If they are crazy busy, that's not a good time for you to try to perform your cold call. When you confirm that the prospect is available, one of the nice things that does is that buys you a window of time for you to operate in. And this can make both you and the prospect much more comfortable, as opposed to not confirming that the prospect's available and just asking another question and talking about another thing. Every time you ask another question, you're operating on borrowed time. Confirming availability can also help you to create a mini spike in the level of rapport that you have with a prospect because you're being polite and you're showing that you understand that the prospect is busy and you're asking for permission before you try to move forward in any way. Now, one key here is how you try to confirm that the prospect is available, because a lot of salespeople might say something like, "Is it a good time to talk?" Well, we're assuming that all prospects are busy, so it's probably never really a good time to talk. Did I catch you at a bad time? I don't like using the word bad time. It's negative language. Are you busy right now? We know they're busy, so we don't need to ask if they are busy. What we're trying to identify is how busy are they? Do you have a minute to talk? You probably want more than a minute. We also might not want to ask, do you have a few minutes? While that's a little bit more accurate, it might sound like we're asking for too much. Have I caught you in the middle of anything? This is how we recommend that you confirm if the prospect is available. And this one change can have a huge impact on your cold calls because this question is actually really effective at getting a more accurate read on the prospect. Remember, we're trying to identify, are they normal busy or crazy busy? Being in the middle of something is crazy busy. It is doing something or being involved in something or being in a scenario that we don't want to try to take them from. So it's very efficient and effective at getting a real picture on the prospect. It also communicates in a more familiar and less salesy type of way. If it's Monday morning and you want to go talk to your colleague about the weekend, you might stick your head in their office and say, "Hey, are you in the middle of anything?" With that, it's a more familiar way to communicate, more of a way that friends or colleagues or people that know each other communicate. And while you think you might want to make a good impression and communicate in the most professional way, that makes you sound more like a salesperson that's trying to sell something and can increase guardedness. By you sounding more familiar and casual, you can actually decrease guardedness. And because you sound different from other salespeople and people that are calling your prospects, this can be a form of pattern interrupt and help snap your prospects out of an autopilot response. And since you're communicating in a very polite and more familiar kind of way, this is another way that you can help to create rapport with your prospect. Now, one of the most common ways that salespeople will open a cold call is by saying something like, "Hello, Mary, this is Michael Halper calling from Sales Scripter. How are you doing today?" And I recommend you eliminate the question of how are you doing today when you are cold calling. And this primarily applies to true cold calls where you're calling someone that you've never spoken to. If you've spoken to someone at least one other time, you can ignore what I'm about to tell you. But I believe that salespeople try to manufacture rapport by being overly nice. And this is one example of that, by asking someone they do not know, "How are you doing today?" And when you ask that, you flag yourself as being a salesperson that's trying to sell something and trying to manufacture rapport. And that can trigger guardedness, which can lead to objections and more difficulty opening the call. Now you may say, well, I'm just trying to be nice, and what else is there to say at the very beginning of a cold call? Well, here's one small change, and that is when you're opening the call, eliminate the question of how are you doing today, and simply replace that with your question to confirm availability of have I caught you in the middle of anything. Hello, Mary, this is Michael Halper calling from Sales Scripter. Hey, have I caught you in the middle of anything? Now, this one small change here can completely transform your ability to open cold calls. And in fact, I get a lot of feedback from YouTube subscribers and from clients that this one change has completely transformed their cold calling efforts, because you go from sounding like a salesperson and triggering guardedness and objections and change the whole situation to where you're creating a setting that's more familiar, more rapport, less guardedness, and that can drastically improve your ability to open. When you ask the prospect if they're in the middle of anything, you're going to get a few different responses. The prospect may say, no, I'm available. Yes, but I'm okay. Or no, I'm fine. And so if the prospect is not in the middle of anything, the next place that you go in the cold call process, you advance forward to the next step, which is to share the purpose for the call. But now the prospect might also respond by saying something like, well, it depends what you're calling about, or what is this call in regards to? Or they may ask you, is this a sales call? And the great thing about this cold call process is that for all of these responses, you actually do the exact same thing, because the best thing to say for any of these is to also answer with the purpose for the call. So basically, if the prospect says anything other than they are in the middle of something, you move forward to the purpose for the call. But certainly they may say, I am in the middle of something, I'm busy right now, some form of I'm not available. And when that happens, you can deflect with an objection response like, oh, okay, well, I can be really brief, or I could call you back at another time. Which do you prefer? Or you can say, oh, okay, what is the best time for me to call you back? And the nice thing about these objection responses is that when the prospect feels like, okay, they're going to have to deal with you again when you call back, they may end up giving you a couple minutes, depending on just how busy they are, to deal with you in that moment and not have to deal with you again.